Hello, team, and welcome to Bureaucracy. I am your host, Emily Gross, and I am so excited today. I know I start every podcast like this, but I'm actually super excited today because I have the lovely Kim Mutcherson with me, who is a legal expert extraordinaire. And I am so excited to have her, and we're going to talk all things about what the fuck is going on with the right to abortion and access and all that stuff. So, Kim, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Kim Mutcherson. I am the co-dean and a professor of law at Rutgers Law School in Camden, New Jersey. So if you don't really know Jersey geography, I am a Philly person, not a New York person. And I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
My God, thrilled to have you. I was like a person with all these cool credentials and knows so much. I was thrilled. I was like, anyways, I was like, even if you were on the podcast, we're like, let's get a drink because I want to pick your brain.
Love it.
Speaking of, I today am drinking a very cool beer from Talia Beer Co. It's based in Brooklyn. It's woman owned, super awesome. And also, only a woman-owned brewery would have a beer this pretty. I'm just pointing that out there.
It is very lovely, actually.
Yeah, for people who can't see, it's like all mid-modern century with oranges, purples, like reds. All right. Let's see. Yeah, that's fucking delicious. All
Yeah,
right.
nice.
Yeah, that's really good.
Glad to hear
highly
it.
recommend. And Kim, what are you drinking today?
So I'm not a beer person.
Totally fair.
So I am drinking a Sauvignon Blanc from Bread and Butter, which is one of my favorite lines of wines right now.
Sounds delicious. And this is the perfect topic to start drinking because
Yes.
need it to power through. All right.
It has been a week. It has definitely been a week.
So let's start with, obviously, there was a leak from the Supreme Court, which is something that's fucking unheard of.
Yep.
Like, absolutely unheard of. Leak from Supreme Court regarding the ultimate decision in Dobbs versus Jackson. Yeah,
Yep.
Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health, which would overturn Roe v. Wade and therefore millions of women in the country access to abortion.
Yep.
Let's talk about this leak. What was in it like? And first of all, it is important to recognize that this is a draft. It is not the final decision. So women in these states can still get abortion. It's still not Roe v. Wade. It's still not overturned, like that type of stuff. However, it is very, very poignant and showing of what the court will ultimately side with in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for saying that this is a draft opinion, that it has not been released yet.
Yeah.
And so if you have an appointment to have an abortion, you go to your appointment.
Yes.
It is still legal wherever you are. So yes, it's incredibly unusual for an opinion, a draft Supreme Court opinion, to be leaked in this way. There's been all sorts of wild speculation about who leaked it and why, which I'm not especially interested in engaging in because none of us know, and then so therefore we don't know what their motivation was. But the opinion does basically what a lot of us who do this work were expecting it to do. And I'll say, if you had asked me, even a year ago, when we knew that Dobbs was going up to the Supreme Court, if the court was going to overrule Roe, I would have said, no, I don't think so. I think they'll continue to chip away at it, but they won't do anything that drastic. And then when SB 8 happened in Texas and the court refused to halt the law, even though it was a blatant violation of Roe v. Wade and the court's jurisprudence, that's the moment where I thought, oh, that's how we're going to do this.
You're like, that's not good.
Yeah, that was a very,
sign.
very bad sign.
Yeah.
And so I was expecting that they were going to overrule Roe, and that's exactly what they've done. What I should explain, though, is that they actually are overruling two cases, and Justice Alito says this very specifically, that they're both overruling Roe and overruling Casey. Mm-hmm. Just a little bit of history here for folks.
Please, lay it on us.
All right, I got it. Roe v. Wade was decided in 1973. The court there was a 7-2 decision. which is, in the last several years, abortion decisions have been 5-4, 5-4, right? Just a cage match there. But Roe said that, there's a fundamental right to abortion that can be found in the Constitution, not explicitly, obviously, but that can be found in the Constitution. And they said that states also have an interest in potential life, so there has to be some give there in terms of states being able to regulate. So in Roe, they said in the first trimester, states can't regulate at all. In the second trimester, they can regulate, but only to protect the health of the pregnant woman or pregnant person. And then in the third trimester, they can go as far as to even ban abortion, but there has to be an exception for the life or health of the pregnant woman.
Right.
And Roe was problematic in a whole bunch of different ways, if you've read the opinion, but, fundamental right to abortion, trimester framework. In 1992, they issued a decision in Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which was a case that came up from Pennsylvania, right across the river from me. And in that case, they said, you know what, we went a little too far in Roe. So we're not going to overrule Roe, but we're going to roll it back a little bit. So they completely threw away the trimester framework. They said, this doesn't work for us. They said that we, in the interim between Roe and Casey, that we just haven't been giving enough credence to this idea that states have an interest in potential life. So we want to be really clear here that states have an interest in fetal life, basically throughout a pregnancy. So from the moment a pregnancy starts until a person gives birth. And they said the standard that we're going to use now is going to be a viability standard. So the dividing line in terms of regulation will be, is it a pre-viability regulation or is it a post-viability regulation?
Right.
And of course, viability is not an exact science, right? We have some, around 24 or 25 weeks. So that's where we were. And then they created this standard called the undue burden standard, which basically said, if you pass a law and it creates an undue burden, right, places an undue burden on women who are trying to access abortions, then we're going to say that that's unconstitutional. So they said we're saving Roe, but they did so in a way that allowed all kinds of legislation to come out. So that's where we got our 24-hour waiting periods. We got our biased informed consent requirements.
You have to look at the ultrasound,
all of it. And then, we got all the cases, all the laws about that abortion clinics had to follow the same rules as ambulatory surgical centers, right? Just the whole nine. I mean, there's a level at which one might be impressed by the creativity of some of these legislative folks.
I'm surprised there's not a law saying you have to build IKEA furniture or sous vide something, and then maybe you can consider an abortion. It's
right. Exactly.
They did as much as they could in their power to make it
that they could
as difficult as possible, but still in the law, which is emphasis on quotations. Right.
Yep, exactly. And so, that's where we've been post-Casey with all of these different laws that have been passed. And then the court again took up the issue of abortion not so long ago, and again said Roe versus Wade is good law. It's not going anywhere. This was just a few years ago.
Oh, really?
And when the Mississippi case, when the court granted cert, which means that they said that they were willing to hear this case and hear this challenge, Mississippi originally said, we're not asking you to overrule Roe versus Wade, right? The only question that we need you to decide is whether a 15-week abortion ban is unconstitutional.
Right. Under the viability?
Under the viability, right?
Okay.
Because obviously 15 weeks is not viability. And so if they were going to stick to their guns, they would say, this is unconstitutional. The fact that they took the case was a clear reflection that they were not intending
plot twist
to protect abortion rights. But what Mississippi did was once Justice Barrett got confirmed and appointed to the court, they changed their position. And they said, now we'd really like you to look at overruling Roe versus Wade. Because at that point, they knew they completely had the votes.
Yep.
So might as well, go whole hog at this point. And so that's where we are. Yeah, exactly. Awesome. And so, when people sort of talk about, the Supreme Court isn't political, the justices aren't political.
Bullshit.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
You said it, not me. But
I'll say it for you. Don't worry.
It's extraordinary to see how this issue has wound its way through the courts, how this particular case has wound its way through the courts, and now this leak, which is, completely bonkers.
Wild.
So we are in some wild territory right now.
The court is so dysfunctional. It is like our
So
new reality
dysfunctional.
TV show. Once again, American politics would be great reality TV. It was not actually American politics.
Yes, exactly.
Could be great if it was not actually controlling our lives.
If it had no impact on how we got to live, it would be super funny.
Super entertaining to watch.
Yep.
However, so one thing that really stood out to me, because I read approximately the first 15 pages of the opinion of the draft before, and then I got overwhelmed.
Yes.
But what I found really interesting was Alito saying, he's like, it's not in the Constitution and we have to follow exactly what's in the Constitution. And it's like, I'm sorry, the Constitution was written by like a bunch of like tween-age white men, like who like didn't even consider like women or like any person of color. You think they're going to be talking about fucking abortions? Like, I'm sorry, their balls just dropped. Like they probably don't even know.
Absolutely.
And it was just one of those statements that was just felt so dystopian in a way, you know, and especially because it would then repeal like same-sex like legalization marriage, stuff like things like that people are now so concerned about, because if some of the statements that go within the draft come true in reality, it repeals the whole concept of we have to adapt the Constitution to modern world and modern life.
Yeah. I mean, so a lot of what is going on here is a contest between different visions of how the Constitution should be interpreted.
Right.
So on one side is folks who say, original intent, textualism, if it's on the page, then that's something that we can do. And if it's not there, then court should not be reading in rights that don't exist. Although there's, of course, a whole amendment that says any right that isn't articulated here is left to the state. So the idea that there are no rights to be created beyond what's in the Constitution doesn't make any sense. But I digress.
Yeah.
So one side is, originalism, textualism, and on the other side are folks, like me, who say the Constitution should be a living document, right? The idea that we would, as you said, that we would sort of, find ourselves mired in and stuck in the thinking of people who, for instance, were okay with the concept of owning other people, maybe aren't the best example of how we should think about
Food
rights.
for thought. Yeah. Crazy concept.
Just take some time with it. Yeah.
Absurd.
So that's the sort of competition. And if you're somebody who, reads Supreme Court opinions, then, you would know that this has been a battle that's been going on in this court for many, many years.
Right.
And this is the first time in the abortion context that there have been enough votes on the court for that to actually succeed. Right. And so, there's a lot of talk in Justice Alito's opinion about, raw exercises of judicial power, and he's so concerned about that. He says that that's what Roe was and that's what Casey was. And yet, you look at this case, which only got to the court, not because there were, a bunch of lower court opinions that were disagreeing with each other, not because people didn't understand Casey or Roe, but because there were enough votes to actually overturn Roe versus Wade. So if you want to talk about raw political power, this is
it's so fucking
example
hypocritical.
number one.
Yeah, especially when they're all like president, and then it's like, sorry, president, don't know her.
Right, exactly.
Oh my God, it's so ridiculous.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some of like the more restrictive laws that are out there now. Because there's the one with Texas SB 8, which then just banned abortion after 6 weeks, and then also then just pitted people against each other because when in doubt, just purge it. I don't get it. It's like one of those things. I was like, we're living in a dystopian novel, and it's not fun. And then there's, of course, the Mississippi one, which I just learned from you that it changed when they realized that they could overturn Roe v. Wade. I just saw Oklahoma in the news recently.
Yep.
What are some of these laws, and what's going to happen when/if, hopefully if, but most likely when Roe v. Wade is overturned? And Casey.
Yeah, so I'm in the when, not the if camp at this point.
And I'm gonna
because
drink.
then that way if they don't overrule it, we get to be happy, right?
Yeah.
So we'll see.
And
So
when they
yeah, so
overrule it, we get a drink more. So
right,
great.
exactly, right? We knew it was coming, and we're ready for it. We have plenty of alcohol in the house.
Right.
So there's this sort of Texas style, what people have been calling bounty hunter laws,
Yeah.
which,
Shitty
when you have to
Western
call
movie.
something a bounty hunter law, that's a pretty scary thing. And it's a 6-week ban, right? Which basically means so early in pregnancy that lots of folks won't even know that they're pregnant at that point. So that's pretty wild. And then Oklahoma, of course, jumping on that bandwagon. And then we have other jurisdictions that are thinking about things like, well, how do we, once we can make abortion illegal in our jurisdiction, how do we punish people who leave the state to have abortions and then come back, which is also incredibly wild. The other thing that I expect that we're going to see are laws that expand the definition of abortion. Right? So normally we would think, a medication abortion or a surgical abortion, that's what an abortion is, right? A pregnancy has taken hold and it is terminated.
Yeah.
But there certainly are people on the right and more conservative folks and maybe some religious folks who think anything that keeps a fertilized egg from implanting in the uterus is an abortion. So your IUD suddenly becomes a tool for abortion. Plan B, right? Suddenly becomes an abortion, not a way to prevent pregnancy. So that's a wave of legislation that I am anticipating that we are going to see. And the other thing that I think we are going to see, and I'm not just like pulling these things out of air, right? State legislators are already talking about these kinds of laws. So the other thing that we are 100% going to see are more laws that criminalize self-managed abortion. So for a very, very long time, the anti-choice folks sort of took this position of we don't want to punish women for getting abortions because women are just victims of the abortion industry, and we should feel sorry for them, and so we don't want to punish them. But one of the shifts that we already see happening, and we saw it in Texas, right? Where we had a woman who was arrested, no legal basis whatsoever, right? But a woman who was arrested for a miscarriage, essentially. So that's the thing that we can expect to see as well. Yeah, it's going to be a very, very wild ride, to say the least.
So fucking horrifying, upsetting. And if unfortunately this becomes the case, I encourage everyone to go give birth on your elected representative's lawn.
Yeah.
Give birth, make it messy, leave the baby. And go.
Right, exactly. I mean, that's another piece of the opinion, and this actually came up in the oral argument of Dobbs as well. The idea that being pregnant and being forced to carry a pregnancy to term isn't really such a big deal because we have safe haven laws, and so if you have a baby and you don't want to keep the baby, you can just drop the baby off at a firehouse and then just go about your business. So what are you so worried about not having access to abortion for, right? I mean, that was a genuine question that was asked by Justice Barrett at the oral argument. And then Justice Alito repeated it.
Yeah, doesn't believe in birth control, which is why she has 20,000 kids.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is, totally her business, totally her right.
What you want.
But the idea that you would make those decisions for someone else, that's where you're crossing a lot of lines that you should not be crossing.
Yeah.
Frankly.
So let's also talk about that, because there is such a high correlation to not being able to have an abortion and going through with an unwanted pregnancy, and then also low income and poverty. And obviously these laws are really going to affect people that are low income and a lot of minority women and people who have uteruses and are forced to carry pregnancies, whatnot. Because it's I personally feel like this decision is also just a way to subvert white supremacy and whatnot, because getting an abortion, let's say you are in Texas right now and you need to get an abortion, and it's all right, you get your 6 weeks in one day, so they won't take you. You then have to find the time to go drive out of town. You have to take time off of work. If you have other kids, you have to have kids watch them. It is so monetarily expensive and can take so much time, which, by the way, a violation of Casey, because that's all about undue burden, right? Whatever. Anyways. So what are some of these facts? How is this correlated? Give us the info.
Yeah, I mean, so there's one really big study called the Turnaway study that was specifically looked at, what happens to women when they are not able to access abortions that they want, and it's sort of all the things that you would expect to happen, right? So some women end up staying in really unhealthy and potentially violent relationships because having a child with that person yokes them to that person, right?
Right.
It's much harder to get away from them. Women who, are unable to move themselves out of poverty because now they've got another child to care for. Women who are otherwise unable to pursue whatever it is that they wanted in their life. And, a piece that doesn't show up anywhere in Justice Alito's opinion is that we live in a country with one of the highest maternal morbidity and mortality rates in the world.
That's crazy.
And Black women are somewhere around 3 times more likely to
Right.
die in childbirth or as a result of pregnancy. So when you make somebody stay pregnant, you are actually putting their life at risk, right?
Totally.
It is much safer to have a first trimester abortion than it is to carry a pregnancy to term. So,
That's crazy.
it's, yeah. Yeah. So it's not, so this idea, going back to sort of Justice Barrett's point about you can just drop the baby off, at a firehouse, sort of suggests that pregnancy is just this, nice little frolic that people engage in for 9 months. You can lose your job.
Yeah.
You can, get kicked out of school, and people can say whatever they want to. We obviously have laws that are meant to protect pregnant women and pregnant people. And we know that employers flout those laws all the time.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, the people who go in for a job interview and are asked, are you, and I say this because I think about the people who are in the more sort of white collar jobs. Are you planning to get pregnant anytime soon? Which is a totally illegal question to ask, right? And then imagine if you're, a woman who's a low wage worker, you're a custodian, you're, working behind a counter somewhere, and you say to your boss, right, I need to take more breaks, or I can't do, the overtime that you're asking me to do. They're going to fire you. Right? No. Are they allowed to legally to do that? No. Will they do it? 100%.
Because you don't have the resources to fight against it.
Right. Exactly.
100%.
And you might not even know that it's illegal
Right.
for them to treat you that way. So, the idea that making people stay pregnant is just a slight sort of bump in the road in their lives is deeply offensive. And they know that. I mean, I think part of what I really struggle with a lot here is that these are smart people.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, these are people who are well-read, who live in the world, and who know all of these realities. And even if they didn't know them before, they know them because they read all the briefs in the case.
Right.
And so to sort of act like, women are totally equal now, so you don't have to be worried about, being pregnant and not being married. And women have all sorts of political power now. So, if they don't want abortion to be illegal, they can just vote, right? And all of this from the same court that's like treating the Voting Rights Act like it's a joke. I mean, so it's just it's like they're living in some completely different world from the rest of us, and people will literally die because of it. And I'm not talking
100%.
about unsafe abortion.
Yeah.
I'm just talking about the many ways in which pregnancy itself creates risks for people.
Which is such an important thing you bring up. And I feel like that's not being super talked about, you know? I mean, I'm 24 and the concept of having a child fucking terrifies me, and like I also have so many hormonal issues that affect my mental health so drastically that it's like the concept of having a baby and knowing my body would just be subject to that tiny little hormone monster.
Yeah.
I mean, it's horrifying, like I have no desire to be pregnant because of the fear of how it would affect me, an already living being, right?
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
I mean, it's wild and terrifying. And a lot of these states already have trigger laws, you know? And so literally the minute this goes in, they're like, all right, no more abortion. And it's...
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. I mean, they're ready to go, right? So you have the states
horrifying.
that have trigger laws. You have the states that are, going to call a special session over the summer to make sure that they can get a ban on the books as soon as possible. So probably within, what are we in May? So probably, by the fall, half the country will have banned abortion. At least half the country will have banned abortion. And so the impact that that has, even beyond what you were saying before about, can you take time off of work? Can you get somebody to watch your kids? Can you drive yourself out of state or fly if you have to, right? Whatever it is that you have to do, all of those things have to come together. One, which will often push people later into their pregnancies, which creates greater risk for you. But, we don't really care about women's safety here. So, I won't even bother.
Women are
to
just
talk about
carriers,
that.
so
yeah, right.
Doesn't
just
matter.
Nice vessels.
Yeah.
Even putting all of that aside, even if you can get to another place, think of how overwhelmed so many clinics are going to end up being, right? When you are normally providing services to, people in your state and maybe a couple other states around you, but now you're going to have, people
Massive
from
influx.
10 states, 15 states, who are coming to you in order to have abortions. Wait times are going to increase. Cost will have to increase. It's just going to be bananas. Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
no other response than oh.
I wonder though, I guess I don't know if it's fair for me to ask you questions. But,
Yeah, go for it.
At 24,
Yeah.
I imagine that there's a level at which you couldn't have imagined that at this age we would be talking about the end of legalized abortion.
No, it's
in
fucking,
the United States.
It's fucking nuts. It's
Yeah.
like one of those things where, you hear about it and you've heard about PreRo, it's wow, so easy, and I even remember before when you had to be over 18 to go get Plan B. Because I was a teenager when that was the case. And it was like, how are we going to get it? Stuff along the lines of that. Or when birth control, you used to have to pay for it and insurance didn't cover it, So I remember going through these stages. And now it's at the point where it's like, oh my God, one of these rights that is just something that I grew up in Chicago, and I remember my mom made an offhanded comment once. I was like, what if I got pregnant? And she was like, we would take care of it.
Right.
It was like one of those things where it's like, it was very pro choice. We're very open. If you ever need an abortion, we will help you get access to it. The fact that it's just still having these conversations when we have so much more science, we have so much more information to show the detriments of forcing women to carry a child that they know themselves cannot have. It's fucking mind-blowing that this is the state that we're in.
Yeah. Yeah. And remember, some of these statutes, they don't have exceptions for rape or incest.
Which is so upset. I'm sorry. I'm going to let you finish, but just I just need everyone just to re-emphasize that, just no exceptions for rape or incest. First of all, a child out of incest is going to be fucked. Second of all, fucking rape. Are you fucking kidding me? Yeah. It's insane. And it just shows how fucking out of touch men are making these decisions. And women who also go with that. I'm sorry, just talk to someone who's been the victim of one of those things. Just have a fucking conversation and see their opinion and how they feel. And then maybe it'll change your mind,
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
crazy.
The answer that you'll often hear, from anti-choice people, is, well, it's not the baby's fault, right? The fact that something absolutely horrific happened to you that got you pregnant isn't the fault of the fetus, isn't the fault of the unborn child. And so why should that entity be punished because of this bad thing that happened to you? Which is just
crazy.
Yeah, right? And even when you think about, a 12 or 13-year-old, that is not a body that is ready to carry a pregnancy and give birth, right? So you would rather see a 12-year-old girl die than allow her to terminate a pregnancy in a set of circumstances where she never should have been pregnant in the first instance, right? The trauma to her is somehow, and the way you're compounding that trauma is somehow less worthy of respect and care than, a fetus, or, and particularly given that 90+% of abortions that take place in this country take place in the first trimester, right? So these billboards with a 3-month-old with
literally
they're big round head and
and it's like, I'm 3 months in womb, and it's like, no, you're not. All right.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Exactly. Right. That is not what is going on when somebody is getting an abortion in the
No.
first trimester of pregnancy. So, and it's kind of like, there's a part of me that feels like the, abstinence only education and abstinence only sex ed and, these kinds of ways in which people are really comfortable with maintaining ignorance for their children,
Yep.
allows them to make some of these ludicrous arguments, right? The idea that a first trimester fetus is like, screaming
Or their fingernail argument.
Right. I mean, and even if you believe any or all of those things, there's this philosopher at Georgetown who I love, and her name is Maggie Little, and one of the concepts that she talks about is fetal geography. And that's the thing that so many of these folks pay no attention to. Fetuses don't float out in the air. They are inside of someone's body.
Yeah.
And so, whatever conversation that you want to have about the rights of a fetus, you cannot have that conversation without recognizing that you are forcing somebody to, however you want to think about it, save the life of this fetus, to take responsibility for this fetus, to sacrifice themselves on behalf of this fetus. And so,
Yeah.
when you read an opinion like Justice Alito's opinion, which is, just sort of blithely ignores the realities of pregnancy, the realities of the world that we live in, and treats women and the bodies of other pregnant people as something that the state can just conscript because of its interest in potential life, it says a lot about the ways in which women in particular continue to not be valued in this country.
100%. It's just so upsetting.
It is. It's very upsetting. It's very
You know.
upsetting. And my hope is that there's a degree to which this will be galvanizing for a lot of people. Because to be perfectly frank, there are plenty of places in this country where abortion access has been really difficult for many years.
Totally.
But, the people who were really seeing that are, women in rural communities, poor women, folks who are, the most vulnerable of the vulnerable in lots of ways. And so now we have this moment where, women in lots of other parts of the country are saying, oh, wait a minute. Like, maybe it's not just Mississippi.
Right.
Maybe it's not just Kentucky, right?
Exactly.
Like, this is coming for me too. And so potentially this is a moment where we get people, really fired up and really angry and feeling this real sense of, righteous indignation about what this group of people in Washington who none of us got to vote on, making these decisions that have huge impact on how women get to live their lives, and they don't seem to care.
No matter what your opinion is, it's your opinion. It's up to you what you want to do with your body, which should not be a fucking crazy concept,
Right.
Like,
right.
it's especially under the Constitution, if we're going to go back to the Constitution, where it's all about personal privacy, which Roe is like more or less founded on.
Yep.
So for all these people that are fucking concerned about like the NSA tapping into their phones, like government overstepping and shit like that, well, counter argument.
Forcing vaccines, making me wear a mask.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Like, absolutely crazy.
So let me give maybe a little bit of sunshine here.
Please, for the love of God, please.
It's very, very little.
Yeah,
it's very
right.
little bit.
Okay.
Which is that the ways in which, it's always been the case that there are ways to self-manage an abortion.
Right.
Right? And there are very dangerous ways to do that, and there are much safer ways to do that. So, one thing that also existed in our past when there wasn't wide access to legal abortion, was women who would teach other women how to do abortion procedures, right? Lay people, because frankly, abortion isn't necessarily that difficult, right? If you have the right tools and if you have the right training. So I am imagining that we're actually going to see a lot more self-managed abortion, and that can be done safely. And then we also live in a world of medication abortion.
Right.
And states are going to work really hard to go after that, right? They're going to say it's illegal to buy the pills, it's illegal to sell the pills, it's illegal to take the pills. If you show up at the hospital and a physician thinks that you tried to self-manage an abortion, call the police, right? I mean,
Right.
all of those things are going to happen, but boy, is it going to be hard for them to control that, right?
Right.
The world is just so different than what it was in the 60s or the early 70s. So I think there are a lot of women who are still going to be able to have access to safe abortion, even if it's not legal abortion. So that's a little bit of a good thing.
Yeah. It's just going to
Although,
be
as I said,
undercover, literally.
exactly, we are living in what can only be described as an extraordinary time. And so we'll see what happens,
Yeah.
right? I mean, and the other thing that I really want to stress as people are thinking about these issues, no matter what you think about abortion, a world in which our Supreme Court is getting all giddy about taking rights away from people should concern all of us, and particularly if they are doing it on the basis that is being articulated by Justice Alito, right? They're not rights that are firmly rooted in the nation's history and tradition,
Which
right?
would horrify
our
you.
history and tradition
Yeah.
is about marginalizing and inequality
Yeah.
and violence and all
Literally.
sorts of things.
100%.
Yeah, so that's really troubling. If it's not enumerated in the Constitution, the internet didn't exist when the Constitution was written. So does that mean we can't regulate the internet at all because they couldn't have thought about the internet, right? I mean, that's just foolishness.
Insane.
To even think that way.
Public,
but,
public plumbing. It really
everything.
exists in that time.
Yeah,
Sorry, you're all going to have
exactly.
to start shitting in buckets again. All right.
Exactly. we can't control this
Sorry.
kind of thing. Yeah.
Your taxes go
Yeah.
to that, so might as well. Everyone, get
Yeah.
your buckets ready if we're going by
Yeah.
this logic.
Yeah, I mean, so, we'll see what happens. And, there have been so many conversations about the Supreme Court in the last few years. I think that there are a lot of people who probably didn't know as much about the Supreme Court 3 or 4 years ago as they do now. And so, I guess there's some value in that.
Right.
But are we going to expand the court? Are there going to be term limits, right? I mean, what are the ways in which potentially this branch, right? Because executive branch, we get to control who ends up as the president. Legislative branch, we get to control who ends up in the legislature. Supreme Court, right? The judicial branch is just, a bunch of folks who rise in the ranks, or a bunch of folks who've been identified by the Federalist Society 10 years ago, and they've been sort of moving them towards, a Supreme Court position for years and years. So if this is a moment that allows us to really rethink that the way in which the Supreme Court is organized, that could be valuable too. And speaking of the Constitution doesn't say anything about there being only 9 justices.
Yep.
The Constitution doesn't say you get to sit for the rest of your life, right? So, there are definitely
Alito,
changes
take that.
could be made there.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
So where do we go from here? For so many women, this feels like it just feels like you're stuck living in a shitty world, and it feels like it feels so hard to know what to do next, So what do we do? Where do we go?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the first thing is, I think it's really important for all of us to not let despair lead to inaction. That's the first thing, right? Like this, we cannot accept that this is just the way things are going to be now.
Right.
And just watch this happen. This is our country too. And we should take responsibility for it. So that's the first thing. The second thing is to remember that there are people in organizations who have been in this fight for decades. So, we don't need to create a bunch of new organizations. Like if you want to volunteer somewhere or you want to give money somewhere, track down your local abortion fund. Go be an escort at your local clinic, because frankly, I think that we're going to see a lot more protests and potentially violence, right? After this opinion comes out in June. So, think about how you can protect the abortion providers in your community. Think about your level or lack thereof of political engagement. So much of what happens in the next few years is going to have to happen on a local and state level. Something that's worth thinking about as well, right? How do you use whatever it is that you have in order to be able to move the needle here? And, you know, there are lots of concerns about the whole, well, you have to just get out and vote. That's what's going to make the difference because, as I said earlier in our conversation, right, this Supreme Court has also been endorsing all sorts of voter suppression
Yep.
statutes
Yeah.
across the country. So just saying to people, go out and vote
Doesn't
is
work.
probably not enough. But voting does matter. Local elections matter. Don't just vote every 4 years when there's a presidential election. Pay attention to the midterms and everything
Yep.
that's going on.
Midterm year. It's a big year, guys.
Yep,
Massive
exactly.
year.
You know, yeah. So you know, pay attention to those things, and don't be silent. I mean, I think another piece of the puzzle here is because there is so much stigma around abortion. There are plenty of people out there who are so appalled by the idea of anybody having an abortion who love someone deeply who's had an abortion and they just don't know. And so, you know, I think that there's real power. You know, I do abortion work. I also do a lot of assisted reproduction work. And, you know, those are both spaces where there's a lot of shame and stigma around, you know, infertility or around being somebody who terminates a pregnancy. And that is something that we need to break down. And I know that it's hard, but if you are willing and if you are brave enough to do it, you know, being that person who says, I mean, we've seen a few different you know, women in Congress who have started talking about their abortion stories. We saw Letitia James from New York at the rally the other day. She talked about her abortion story. Those things matter. 1 in 3 women in this country will have an abortion in their lifetimes. This is not a rare thing.
No.
And most of those women, when they have an abortion, they will already have children at home.
Right.
Most women who have abortions in this country are already parents.
Moral of the story, trust women to make their own decision.
Yes.
If you would like to make a decision about your body and the concept of someone regulating you seems absurd to you, this applies just the same.
There you go.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well,
Yeah.
any final words of wisdom or anything else you'd like to touch on?
You know, I just want to really reinforce the hypocrisy of what we're seeing here. You know, I already talked about the fact that we have this ridiculous mortality and morbidity rate for pregnant women in this country. We have an extremely high infant mortality rate in this country. We have a very weak social safety net.
Yep.
Everybody doesn't have access to health care. I mean, just on and on and on and on. And so the idea that, you know, these folks are putting so much energy into banning abortion while all of this other stuff, and quite frankly, a lot of this other stuff, if you were paying attention to it, would potentially have an impact on abortion rates.
Yeah.
Right?
Uh-huh.
But we don't want to do all that work. We just want to ban abortion.
Yep.
And make people stay pregnant who don't want to be pregnant. So I think, you know, calling out that hypocrisy is just so critical. Right. And so every state that, you know, whenever in June or whenever their, you know, trigger laws go into effect and these legislators are, you know, standing on the courthouse steps, patting themselves on the back, you know, I want people standing there with signs that say, this is the maternal mortality rate in our country. This is how many kids go to bed hungry every night in this jurisdiction. This is how many kids don't have access to health care. Right. I mean, don't tell me how much you care about babies.
Yeah.
When you are willing to watch all of this pain and do nothing about it.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and once again, tied into so many other social services and whatnot. So if you hate paying taxes for people to be able to communally, you know, get the social services they need, well, then maybe you should support the access to abortion because then there's potential less mouths to feed, less people under the poverty line to take care of because having a fucking child is so expensive. I am 24 and I still suck the life dry of my mother, okay? You know? Like, and I'm an only child and like, she's thankful for that, you know?
Right.
So, Kim, yeah, you know, Kim, it has been so great to have you on this podcast. Thank you so much for talking with us, even though it's, once again, I don't think I've ever talked about something on this podcast that's been fun, but it's all educational. You know?
Yes.
It's all educational, very important for people to know. And, you know, it's my time to get to have a beer and like sit and have a cool conversation, you know? But anyways, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. And
absolutely.
Yeah, everyone Keep fighting. Don't let this be the
Yes.
case. Provide support to your community, to people around you, because this is really going to be community action type of thing.
Yep. Absolutely.
Totally.
Absolutely. And pay attention to the dominoes,
Yeah.
right? Because it
100%.
starts here, and then it's contraception, and then it's, them telling you what you can do with your embryos that you froze after
Yep.
IVF, and, so pay attention.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for listening, everyone. I'm your host, Emily Gross, and we will be back next week with another episode of Bureaucracy.